Welcome back, everybody, to the Focus to Win podcast. We got a really exciting episode today. I know last week we focused on the financial piece of everything, but let's make a little bit of a transition and focus more on the personal life aspect. So Lee and I discussed a little bit before here, what is super important in life. And one of the things we always talk about is work-life balance. So I'm very curious to hear from you, from a work-life balance, how have you managed your time to put deposits in different aspects of your life?
Well, just to start too, I would also think of, you ever had bad days, right? A lot of times if you've had a bad day at home personally, that goes into your whole day.
Yeah.
Versus if you had something go wrong at work, it's business and it's like not the end of the world, but the bad day at home goes through your whole freaking, no matter what you're doing. So just something to think forward to is like, let's solve that issue as fast as you can. Otherwise, the more it gets out of control, the worse it is. So now getting into your question was,
how do you manage work-life balance? What's the secret? How do you put deposits in these different areas of life?
No true secret, but I would say is like always working through problems. Balance, and it's a balancing, right? It's never a true balance. I'll never forget sitting in Gary Keller's masterminds, and he's like, life is always balancing, because even no matter what, most people that are at work a 9-to-5 job these days, they still take their phone home with them, and there's email, there's all kind of crap on there. And it's distracting, think all the bings and dings that you get through a day. So now it's a matter of how do you balance it the most appropriately. So a lot of it's calendar management. So if you don't live by a calendar, you need to figure that out first of all. So work-life balance would be put all your big things in. So always big rocks. So you have a vacation, you have like date night. You want to stay married, do some kind of date night. Like we have one with our grandkids too, that they come over on Wednesday night at 5:00. Well, 5:30 now. But we know that, like, hey, I know what Wednesday nights are, so anytime something would get in the way of Wednesday night, I'm like, I can't do it. Or I have to check with my daughter and say, hey, what about if we move that to Tuesday instead? Would that work? But there's your balancing of like, hey, I know certain days I have these big rocks in there, or you're going on vacation. You would put that in early in the year. Hey, a lot of people plan vacation, maybe not as far out, but I'd say months to sometimes it's a year ahead of time.
Yeah. It's funny you bring that up. I remember when I first joined our team, I didn't really put anything in my calendar because when I played sports, everything was already structured for me. So this is a whole new thing. And when I looked at your calendar and I was like, he's like, well, you could see my Google Calendar, pull it up, and it had everything. Yeah. Not just, I got a meeting or a call at this time. It's, hey, I'm going on a date from these blocked hours, so I'm not going to be on my phone. And that's something that you definitely learned over the years, and that's someone who's experienced the ups and downs of not
you go
doing
through
it.
problems, or like you get into fights at home. It's like, all right, well, how do I make them happy?
Right.
Like, all right, well, you should have a date night with your spouse or significant other, because otherwise you're probably not going to have that significant other at some point.
Right.
If you're not putting value to them, you're value on work, but you're not valuing the other things. And the same thing would be with your kids. Like as kids age and getting older, they want to go spend time with their friends, so they just want to spend less time with you. But how can you get in their life? Could you do lunch with them? Could you do certain things periodically? Could you go to the gym with them? What is it? I just think of even you and your dad.
Yeah.
Like you guys go to the gym sometimes together and different things. Like that's a balancing, right? It's like, all right, there's always give and take, but you're going to have times when that's saying when you make hay while the sun's shining, right? So you may have to work till 7, 8, 9, and depending on where you're at in your career. So I think of my early days in business that I was growing through, my wife knew I wasn't going to be home a lot of cases till 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night. So I always made sure I was like, all right, what one night a week could I be home to eat dinner with them at 6? I may go back out and go to my appointments, but when can I have dinner with them? And I can't say I was always the best at that, because it's like you get so swamped with everything, but you get better with time or pain. Hey, you're pissing off your spouse. You're tired of them chiming in your ear. So you either blame it all on them or you figure out how you can fix it. And you figure out how you can fix it by calendar management. That's the easiest way. Is like schedule the time in. Hey, let's do dinner one day a week. I talked to my wife on Friday and I was like, hey, maybe we'll go to the movies tonight. Of course, when I look up what's at the movies, I'm like, there's nothing I want to see. I was like,
well, everything's on the streaming services.
Right. I was
now,
like, how about we'll just chill out, watch a movie. We're doing some things the next couple of nights, but it was just kind of funny. I was like, we haven't been to the movies in forever, and I'm like, I guess I know why. so and that in choices, right? So you always there's too many choices. Period.
I think you have a really good point. My question to you is: did you feel when you made those deposits, even though maybe you were lower on energy or you didn't really sleep well the night before because you were working long hours, that when you block that time for that person, whether it be your significant other, your family, whatever it is, it was easier to then allow them to trust you to go back to work and say, hey, he took time to make that.
Yeah.
It's no longer like, oh, you're working 8 out or 15 hours a day. It's like he took the time out of so I'm able to do my own thing while he does his.
Right. Well, and I think it's communication too, because a lot of people don't communicate well. Where if you say like, hey, this is what's going on, or like, here's an idea of what my day is. So I would show my wife, I'm like, here's my cat. Like this, I don't have a lot of gaps in here for the day.
Right.
I'll make time of certain days. Hey, you have this going on. You have a doctor's appointment that's really important. I'm going to be there for it. I'm going to schedule around it. And most stuff we know a week to 2 weeks ahead of time, so you can get better at it. Plus, I talked about this in the past too. The more boring you make your day, weeks, years, like, hey, consistently, I know during these time blocks, this is where I'm at. I know during these days, this is where I'm at. So the more boring, even though your life's not boring from it, but you're pretty structured, the better structure-wise you get, but it's calendar management.
Yeah.
How do I block that day?
Yeah, you did a good job with that. And I see you doing that. You're like a master at that. You master the art of structuring time very well. Just because I noticed.
Didn't start that way. I was all over the board.
Yeah. But it seems as if I could tell like if you're out of your routine because you're like, man, like it's tough because you had something that shifts that because you made your day so quote unquote boring. It's not really boring.
Right.
Because you know what to do and your body's conditioned to think that. And that's that's a talent in itself.
But you get better at it by practicing a lot, right?
Yeah.
It took a lot of practice to get from really bad at it, having your spouse pissed at you, like thinking that you don't listen to them and all the other things. Like, all right, well, I'm doing this for the betterment of us overall, but you can't see. And I would say, like this time of the year, we're starting to do business planning. So make sure that they know what your business plans are too. Like, hey, this is what our goals are for the year. And then what I did with my wife too was like, hey, what's on your bucket list? I need to know what's important to you, so I know, like, hey, we want to go to Italy, and then she wanted to see the Beatles, Paul McCartney.
Yep.
So that was like 2 years prior. Like, this was probably like 21, and she, has like added it to. She's like, good luck. He's almost 80 years old, and like he's hardly ever playing. Well, they happened to come here at Camden Yards and play, so I had made sure I signed up. Like, as soon as I was open and I could buy tickets, I was buying tickets.
That's awesome.
And I got a really good seat, so like 12 rows back from the stage, and I was like, this is a bucket list.
Right.
But I needed to also know, like, what am I doing to make her happy?
Right.
And she knows I'm listening.
Right.
So make sure when you're doing business planning, find out what that other person, what's important to them, so you can blend that in your life, because again, they're being heard, they're being felt, and now you've done something for them, right?
That is such like a good point. That is something that many people don't even think about. Is like when you're making your business plan, and I remember you were telling me this, is you're making it obviously for yourself, but if you have people that you love and care about, is you want to share this moment. You're working for not just yourself, but for these people around you. And that is I think that is like how you're able to put her in a place,
right.
Like everybody says, this goes first, this goes second. You took everything together and like, this is my priority. And it all came together where you worked hard and she sees why you're working hard because you care about her, and it all comes together.
And then I went to the concert with her.
Right.
And then like, hey, enjoyed it together. And like, she talks about that kind of like, oh my God, it was so amazing. Blah, blah, blah. I was like, I'm glad that I'm glad I asked the question, because if I never asked the question, I wouldn't know that it was that important. We would have missed the concert, or I would have been all the way in the back, and you're not having the same experience as buying tickets that are so close up front. But also had already factored that in the business planning of like, hey, I need probably X amount of dollars for it.
Right.
So I could pay for those better seats rather than getting nosebleed seats.
Absolutely.
And create that experience, especially as a bucket list item. It's not like, oh yeah, we're going to 50 concerts in a year. We're going like, hey, what is this one that you really want to see? Or, if you want to go places, where do you want to go? Who do you want to do it with? What do you want to see while you're there? So again, that's going to be scheduled over time. So like vacations and stuff of that sort. But a lot of it comes back to planning, where most people don't plan.
Yep. They just blindly go into the year. They have a very vague goal of whether it says, I want to lose weight. And there's no numerical value. There's no task or objective on it. You knew she wants to see the Paul McCartney. I'm going to make sure not only we're going to go there, we're going to share a high quality experience. We're going to do it at the highest level possible. And that's so important.
Yeah, and I wasn't on my phone at all. My only thing I was on the phone was taking pictures and doing videos.
Right,
for
but that's because you let those micro tasks lead to the big result. And that's so important. And that is, if all the viewers are listening to one thing, that's so important. important. It kind of leads into the next thing we wanted to talk about is how do you manage the finances together? So obviously when you're doing a business plan together, it's one unit working for one goal or one objective as together, right? That's what's so important in a marriage is what it seems like here, what makes it successful. So how are you able to jointly take the finances and create one there? Or is it a situation where maybe you keep things separate?
Well, it's funny because I can't say there's one, or there's no one right thing, right? It's not only one way, but can only talk from experience. For us was like we did Dave Ramsey's Financial Peace University. So we created a budget like, hey, this is where we're spending and where, and then the rest is we're saving like crazy. So do you want to go to a concert? Great. We can get really good seats there, and this is what we're going to do. But if I didn't save for all those times and I just spent, you don't have the finances to do it.
True. Yeah.
And you don't, I would tell you where you get the most, like, I think of happiness, right? Because it's like we're always searching for happiness, and what is happiness? And there's like, everybody's got to have it's the same thing with success. Like, what's your definition of it? And happiness is kind of hard to say what it is. But I would say where I generally get the most happiness is when you're helping others or you're giving. You get so much, like, people want to get presents, but if you really put a lot of time into giving a good present, and I would say give kudos to my wife because she's probably one of the best gift givers I've ever seen, but she knows how to make you feel. But when you're giving to somebody else, as long as you're giving to their love language at the same time, then amazing what comes out of that. And then there's true happiness of that.
Yeah.
Or a lot of people think the journey of, all right, hey, I'm working these 15-hour days for a while, right? Look at definition of success there, the iceberg up there.
Always.
Not so much definition, but like you're working all this time and all this spent at it, and you're like, shit, where is this going? Like,
right. You can't take it with you when it's all said and done.
Yeah. So you gotta find the happiness in the journey. A lot of people are like, this is what I'm doing, blah, blah, blah. I'm getting to this. This is the destination. I'm like, you can go after all that, but you are not getting the happiness.
It's not going to happen.
The happiness is on the way.
Right.
And you're going to have ups and downs in the happiness. Just like the work-life balance is that true balancing. You're not going to be exactly like, oh, I'm 100% balanced. I don't know anybody.
No, and that's super hard. And I always tell people all the time, like, I don't really think there's ever a true work-life balance, like, because when you tie the work-life balance into how do you handle finances as a team, I mean, whether you want to have separate accounts here just because you want to spend your own money, whatever it is. But I think the biggest issue marriages have, and we talk about all the time, 75% are because of finances. Yeah. And the reason why is there's probably lack of communication, or I feel as if they're going after two separate things. And
because it comes back to communication, not enough of it to find what they really want.
Right.
Or to find, are you on a good journey? I was listening to, God, what's his name? I can't think of his name now, but he was talking to, like, his business coach said to him when he met this person, he's like, is she improving your stats? And he's like, what do you mean by that? And he's like, all right, are you doing better now that you two are together? Are you making more money? Are you more physically fit? And he's like, yeah, actually, I'm making more money. And then I'm like so much more physically fit because I'm going to the gym more, and she cooks more, and she cooks healthy, and blah, blah, blah. It's like, yeah, she's improving my stats.
Right.
So you have to think of what's important. And he was saying, you know, that their core values pretty much align, their purpose align. So when you're looking, because one of your questions, and I'm going to fast forward to the end here, is like basically was, how do you know it's a one? And you have to make sure you align in your values, number one. And number two, do you have that same purpose that you're going after?
Right.
But it comes back to communication. How do you know those things if you're not communicating effectively?
Right.
Where so many cases, people are not having that open communication, especially when it comes to money.
Yeah. That's
like the most awkward. That's worse than them talking about sex.
It's very, it's so sensitive. I think it's crazy. Like you mentioned, you know, they could talk about like sex or whatever. It's just so casual. But nowadays, like if you bring up anything financially, it's almost looked at as a bad thing.
Yeah.
And that's partially why. And I would love to see the statistic on why the correlation between why society doesn't like to talk about money, and ironically why 75% of the marriages today that are divorces end up because of that. Yeah. So I truly believe, like from what you're saying, that the way I take this is that if I'm a young individual and I'm in search for this person, and we'll get a little more in depth in a second, but when it comes to the financial piece is that you have to have the same aligned goal. And whether it's your core values, I think if you are passionate about money and that person may not be as motivated, as long as they see why you're doing it, that's super important.
The other thing is opposites usually attract.
Yeah,
Right.
that's so true.
You have one that's a saver and one's a spender. So you have to be careful of that. It's like, all right, who's which one, who's which role, and then how are we going to counterbalance that so we don't save so much and then never enjoy it, and then we don't spend so much that we never get to enjoy it either.
Right.
You know, it's like, so yeah, like how is that? It's like, again, balancing, right? But the only way to balance it is communication. A budget, it's a painful, create the budget because it's a painful conversation, but it's better. That's much more painful than having to divide everything up.
Right.
If there's anything left when you get a divorce.
Yeah. I think from a financial perspective, and what you were saying earlier about it is that, let's say in the case that, you're married to someone who maybe she wants to work, or maybe she wants to work part-time, or not, maybe focus on the family, right? Which can be a good thing. But I think there's that communication part is super important. I mean, I've realized it as I've gotten older that when you set expectations ahead of time, when you don't do that, unfortunately, it'll catch that other person on their heels. You're just trying to, if you go through it, expecting them to understand where you're coming from or why you're doing it without having a clear message and those painful conversations on, here's our budget, this is what we're trying to accomplish, X, Y, and Z. You're blindly going into it, and the person's going to get cloudy mirrors. They're going to see this and be like, well, he's working 15 hours, and in your mind, you're thinking you're benefiting that person.
The other thing that comes is the way you communicate.
Yeah.
So think of your younger generation.
Yeah.
So a lot of it's so much by text.
Yeah.
So much is lost in translation in text. What did they mean? Like now, if they voice text, you can get a little bit better of it, but most of it is.
That's so
I
true.
mean, you go to dinner somewhere, you see everybody they're sitting there like this. I'm like, guys, put it away. You guys are right next to each other and you're not communicating. Like I make sure that I'm looking at my wife when we're talking, and we may search something on my phone. We get into a subject, and then I'm pulling out my phone and we're searching it. Not that either one of us can see it without reading glasses, but rather than you see two people sitting at a table, or three or four people sometimes sitting at a table, and they're glued in their phone, and I'm like, that's not how are you guys communicating? Eye to eye communication. So you have to have that to go and find, dig deeper with them to find out what's important to them. Find out, are your core values in a line? What do you really stand for? What do you want out of life?
Right.
Where do you want to go? What do you want your family to look like? Do you want no kids? Do you want one kid? Do you want 10 kids? What is it that you look like? Right. I was just out in the Midwest, and it was like everybody had 5 to 7 kids.
Wow,
so
that's crazy. Big families then.
Yeah.
Why is that?
I don't know.
Culture?
Something in the water. I'm not sure. It's but around here, then you're seeing an average of 0 to 2 for the most part. But that was it all. That's what gets into a whole nother story. But I just think of communication as what is it that you really want, balancing out of things, and that's a constant, right?
Yeah.
Just know that it's always moving. There's more businesses formed today than ever before. Can't say they're successful,
right,
but a lot of them are formed. So it's easy to create a business, creating LLC, blah, blah, blah. But then what does the business look like? Because if you think you're getting into a new business and you're going to have more free time, because a lot of people all right, I'm going to go work for myself. Fantastic. Do you realize you're going to work twice as much?
Yeah.
Because you maybe had a janitor or house cleaner or a cleaner there, somebody that empties his trash, somebody that does the marketing, somebody that does
paying rent.
Yeah.
Office
accounting to... for us, transaction management, all these different managers. And now you're going to go create your own business in today's environment where there's more uncertainty than ever. Mm-hmm. And you think you're going to work less hours. That ain't going to happen.
Yeah.
Or you're going to have unsuccessful businesses out of business. 87% are out.
Everybody glorifies it. And they, in the business world, everybody says, well, the CEO, has all this money, or the owner. It's like, well, if you were to see what goes into it, I feel like a lot of people would be like, no, I'm okay with where I'm at. But they're never going to have that, I guess, vision or perspective, because they're not in that position. And until you are in there and you can vouch for this, it's a whole different ballgame. And especially when you have a significant other, there's stuff on the line, there's things you want to accomplish together, and you're assuming a lot of risk. I mean, there's a high reward in return on it. But you got to ask yourself, how am I going to be able to manage this? And like you said, in this uncertain time, but also take care of that person and not let my work and my family get intertwined and balanced.
Well, that and suffer in the process, right?
Right. So that leads to the next one. How do you put on these different masks when you go into the door? Because you have the boss or the CEO of the company, then you also have, I'm the husband, I'm the father, I'm the grandfather. How do you change that without kind of getting caught up into, if you had a day bad at business?
Yeah.
How do you not take it home?
And sometimes you come across wrong. Like I was listening to something the other day, and Dean Graziaso said one of the things that he would never do is really talk badly to his kids. And because he was talked that way periodically from his dad, you know, he's like, you're always high stress and so forth. And he had asked his daughter to clean her room. That was the only thing he asked.
Right.
And she had just taken him to a concert, or he had just taken her to a concert and this and that. And he goes in her room's like a bomb went off. And he's like, oh my God. He's like, I called her and I went off on her, blah, blah. And then he's like, oh my God. Like afterwards, after he calmed down, he's like, what did I just do? Right. So, because you get caught up in the moment, like he was probably stressed from something else business wise, right? So you're trying to divide that of the ones we love the most get the harshest stuff from us sometimes, right?
Yep.
So wife, kids, all that stuff, because we love them the most.
Right.
We're also the most authentic and less polished too, right? So sometimes they're gonna take something hard. Like my wife has said many times, they're like not as much lately, but I would say 10 years ago, she was like, I'd rather be one of your clients than your wife sometimes, right? I'm like, because you know you're high stress in the moment. You're driving, your phone's going off. She's trying to have a conversation with you. You're trying to answer a phone. You're trying to sell, like you're trying to sell a house.
Deal on the line.
Yeah, deal blowing up or whatever it may be. But as you get into this tougher markets, like as the economy's changing, you know, we got 8% interest rates, all this stuff that's affecting us, inflation through the roof, so the cost of goods everywhere you go. You talk to people in the grocery stores and you're like, holy shit, there's a lot of
crazy. Not
much in this bag for $100 or $200, you know. So all that thing is adding stress. So you're compiling. So the best thing you can do is try to be the best version of yourself. I think of Ed Milet said it on his podcast was, you under pressure, you revert to your normal, right? So it's like you have to make sure your normal changes. The only way your normal changes by a lot of practice at it. Right. So the better you practice at being a better person, no matter what.
How do you do that?
Practice makes perfect, right? It's like a matter of under high stress times, you have to be a duck on water, meaning you're calm as in silk going across, but you're paddling like hell underneath, right? And you may internally be like so frustrated at something, and then just you have to be kind as a cucumber to them. It's like, hey, I didn't mean this, but this is what. But I think again, communication and practicing it. Like you talk to my wife and ask her how I was 7 to 10 years ago, it was much different than I am today.
Interesting, yeah.
But that is.
So do you feel like for you, like from what I'm hearing, is that you in the beginning, you figuring the process out 10 years
like
ago.
anything. None of us are perfect at anything we do, right?
Right.
The only way you're getting better is repetition at it.
Do you think part of that was just recognizing, hey, this is not me right now. This is an overwhelming of emotions and the human body taking over.
Some is self-discovery. Some is like, they're bitching at you. And I'm like, how do I not get bitched at? How do I not make them? Because you don't want to make them feel that way, right? Afterwards, you're like, holy shit, this is all my fault. And then how do I say I'm sorry? And I'm not good at saying I'm sorry. I'm not like, that came from my dad as a kid. It's like, I'm not saying I'm sorry unless I'm true. If I truly did something to you that I'm sorry, you're going to know. You're going to hear it. But other than that, like, and I'll say to my wife, I'm like, no, I'm not sorry. I'm like, I didn't. This is what I meant by it. This is how you took it. My delivery was probably off. Yes, I am sorry that I delivered it wrong. But am I sorry for what happened? Not really. But you got to put out, like, you're putting on the different faces, right? Like, and it's not like you're lying to yourself. It's you in this life. Different roles.
We're actors and playing different roles. You know, you can't go into life with the business mentality. And I learned this, and my dad always told me this: is like you can't. As an athlete, I always had a competitive edge. You can't take that and put it through everything else in the world, because what happens is then you start to become the asshole of the family because you're always competing and trying to beat everybody at everything. And it's not always about that. And I feel like the more passionate the person is, the more elevated the scenario comes. Like
think of the way people drive.
Right.
Right?
Prime example of that. Prime example.
You know who Mario Andretti is out there? They're the competitive people. It's like, holy shit. You know, I think of when we drive to the beach and I'm like, like I'm gonna run these people off the road, but I'm cognizant. I'm also mindful of what's happening. You have to. So the other thing is like in sports, right? Yep. The better you get at the game, the slower the game is. Yeah. And you become much better at it. Right. So the same thing with anything else. Anything that you're practicing, as you get better at it, you see like, oh, here I go. I better fix this. Don't do it. You know, like you're talking to yourself at the same time.
You're
like,
internalizing
you're
your faults.
Yep. Like, don't do it. You know what happened last time you did this.
Right.
But some people will not process it, and they just.
Yep.
So
they become more external, less internal, and that's super important. Like biting your lips is a prime example.
I would say understanding your personality profile. Like I've done so many personality profiles over the years, and with hiring people, I've reviewed so many. So I'd say knowing somebody's weaknesses, like because strengths overused become weaknesses too. But also, what are your weaknesses? Are you one that doesn't process? Like somebody says something to you, and you just respond.
Yep.
That usually doesn't get you real far.
Yeah.
So you have to slow it down. Let it process, no matter how mad you get. Mm-hmm. Like one of the things my mom taught me as a kid is like count to 10 before you respond.
And that's
sometimes like she's like, if it's hard, you may count to 20. I'm like, it's a long time to count. But I was like, at the same time, but you're de-escalating yourself through that. So hey, I'm gonna process this. I'm gonna think. I think of how I'm gonna respond. I'm gonna think of how they're gonna respond to what I said to them.
Right.
So the better you get at it, the faster it happens for you, even though it's moving slowly.
Right.
Like you think some people that are like quick-witted, long as it's saying something effective.
Yeah.
Like
and that's even hard to do when the emotions are,
like quick-witted, somebody can say something funny, right?
Right.
But quick-witted, can you de-escalate a situation or say something how they're going to react, and can you get them to react the way you want them to react?
Right. And that's super important because people forgetting that it's the relationship is not won or successful in when times are really good. It's when it's at its worst.
Yeah.
How are you able to handle the high stress scenarios? And then from finances, from work-life balance, from all of those things. And the biggest struggle that I feel is if my generation is just so bad as they don't know how to have arguments. They think arguments are this horrible thing. And I refrain back to like the Disney movie theory where it's always happily ever after.
Right.
There's never like a true reality on this is how the relationship actually went after. But that goes to the next point of how do you decide who this person's going to be.
Well, it's fun.
The rest
What you
of
just
your
said a minute ago, though, I think of that's why there's makeup sex for women. Like for couples, it's like all right,
That's so
you
true.
may have your blowout, and then all of a sudden you're all better when you get.
Hey,
to
that
point.
keeps it rolling.
Right,
So take
exactly.
notes, everybody.
Right. But I would say just think of how what you before you say what you're going to say. Think how it's going to affect that person.
Yeah.
And if you can think of how it's going to affect that person and change it to make sure you're getting what you need to get across. But also, how am I going to say something that's going to be the most effective for them to respond in the way I want them to? Also, because otherwise you just go off on them. You're not going to get anything good back.
Right.
But if you process it and you tonality,
Yep.
how are you saying it? What are the words you're using? So just small things.
And that's sales. That's what sales, I think, has taught me so many great things outside of businesses because it's taught me how to handle a lot of that. I mean, I'm not perfect at it, don't get me wrong, but I've learned to handle scenarios a lot better than how I used to because I start to internalize like a personality profile is one of the first things that you made me do when I joined us, and it helped me learn who I am from I think a third party perspective. It's one thing to know yourself from your lens, but another lens is super important because you're going to be with so many different people. And if you want to have a lasting relationship, you got to know your faults.
The other thing you mentioned though was being young. They don't like controversy, right? They figure it's like, and I see it even I see it in everything we do, but there's certain ones I'm like, you've got to be okay with some controversy. And it's not like you're trying to create this big argument, but like you have to learn how to negotiate things because if you just say everything that you want, you're never going to get it. You have to ask. 50% of the time, if you ask for it, you're going to get it.
Yeah.
But a lot of them won't ask either. Or how can what is our greater good that we're trying to get out of this conversation?
Yep.
Like know what your target is because a lot of people go into a conversation and have no target of what they're trying to accomplish at all.
Everything is so at the tip of your hands today. In the dating scene in particular, like I am in the world of everything has such easy accessibility.
Right.
If the relationship is in some sort of turmoil, whether it be finances, whether it be, you're arguing about something or you disagree on something, you got another opportunity with one click.
Right.
And it's a good thing in ways, but it's absolutely devastating in others because the mindset is no longer, how can I work this out? Like, your parents and my grandparents, they didn't have that. It was like, if you wanted to see that person, you couldn't pick up the phone for a certain amount of time. You had to go walk to their house. You got to write a handwritten letter, and you really appreciate the time you're with them a lot more. Rather than today is I can pick up the phone and FaceTime the girl I'm dating or whatever it is, and I know I can hang out with her in 24 hours like that.
Right.
You know, so it's so difficult today to have that, like, how do you know if this person's the one? Like, how do I have this clarity or know that if things get tough, you know, she's not just going to just go by the wayside and just say, oh, I'm done. Oh, things don't go my way, I'm out.
Yeah, that grass is greener.
Right.
All right.
So, like, how do you figure that out in today's world? I mean, you grew up in a different time, but you also are in a business where it's a lot of younger people, and you've seen relationships go really good and some go really bad. How do you decide this is the person that I'm with, or how did you figure that out with Tracy?
But I think see how they how do they react with friends, right? Because you're usually around them and probably your like close friends first, and then how do they interact with family? Where are things at? How do they make me feel?
Right.
Are they a battery charger or a battery drainer? Do they fill you up or pull away? Are they leading me closer to something that I want? Like, what's my? Because a lot of people don't think long term what they want out of life. You just go through life.
Right.
Like, but what do you really want out of life? I would say that would be one good question for you to figure out personally. And number two, does this person get me closer to that or farther from it? Are they a good person? Right? Meaning, hey, are they kind? When I talk to them, do I feel good after I'm talking to them? Because I remember talking to my one sister. They've been married now 45, somewhere around 45 years, right?
Wow.
And this was 20 years ago. So I was like, man, you guys have been married 25 years or whatever. I was like, how is that? And they're like, there's always give and take, right? You just can't go run away when there's something bad happen. In so many cases it is. And it's like, and you also have to take responsibility. If you screwed up, fix it.
Right.
You can generally fix it.
And the hardest part is, even though you may want to do it, you got to trust that they're going to do the same thing for you. Like, reciprocation is so important in that relationship.
But a lot of time you don't get reciprocation. You have to give 100% expecting zero. A lot of people think everything's 50-50. I'm like, good luck.
Right.
That's the life ain't 50-50. Like, you got to give 100%, expect nothing. And if you're giving enough 100%, you're going to get quite a bit back.
Right.
You're going to get some that just, and you know, if you're the one giving all the time, I mean, giving your time, not money. This is like, how are you reacting? You're trying to make them feel good. You're trying to fill them up, and all of a sudden, they're not filling you up. You know it's not the right one.
Right.
I remember
you're giving away an empty piggy bank pretty much.
I mean, I remember dating one girl. We used to argue nonstop.
Yeah.
And I was like, I don't know why. Like, I'd be attracted back to her. I was like, and my mom would be like, what is wrong with you?
Love
Like,
the chicks.
you become
Don't
such
we
a
all?
worse person around her. I'm like, all right, but it was just certain ones. So if you're hearing that ain't the one.
Right.
Like when your parents are like, what's wrong with you?
What are you guys doing? And I think the family validation is important because they know you, probably the people that know you the most beside yourself, and they see it from a different lens, like I mentioned. And I know this is a funny story. So when you first met your current wife, Tracy, how, like, you told her, I'm never getting married. What was the turning point to say, this is the one?
Well, it's so funny because I said, I'm never getting married. She's like, great, I'm not divorced yet. So I was like, all right, even better. So I was just watching her with my son and then how we interacted with, she had 2 kids. I had 1. We were all young. She had her, I was 16 when I had mine. She was 19 and 21 when she had her 2. So I was like, all right, we had the Brady, we always tease, we always had the Brady Bunch. But how is she, does she fill me up or does she take away? And she was always more of a fill me up, super kind. Can't ask for a nice person, great with the kids. It's like, all right, I could see myself spending more time. Like, the more I had around my family, my sister that I had talked about, I was like, hey, what do you think of her? Because I was like, you guys got to be a good judge of character. Correct. You've been together this long. And they're like, oh, I love her, blah, blah, blah. And, we had just, seen her a couple of years ago. She came down and her and her husband spent time with us in Florida. And it was like, and we had just a good time there. And I haven't seen her in 5 years, because they're in Vermont and we're here. But I would say you generally follow your gut.
Yeah.
I was listening to something else, and they said your gut and your brain are attached as an embryo, so it doesn't separate until birth, like as your birth and so forth. But I was like,
it's your second brain as well.
It's like follow your gut. So your gut's going to tell you a lot. When you're dating, you're going to know because you're going to follow your gut. And you're like, holy crap, this is where things are at. I'm like, maybe not.
But was there a specific moment? Because I hear people, oh, it was love at first sight, or most people that I've talked to about this, they usually if you're attracted to them, no kidding. Right. But I think it's built over time. But I'm just curious, was there a specific moment, or did it just flow?
I think a compound. It's like compound effect, right? It's like this. And there's not did we have arguments in between there? Shit, yeah.
Yeah.
Did we
they're necessary.
Was there times that were like, why am I doing this? Yeah. I mean, you're always going to have that. Yep. Like, you think you're going to go through a relationship and it be perfect all the time. Nobody's perfect all the time. Everybody has a bad day.
Right.
Like, something's going on in her life. Something happens at work. Something's stressing her. Car breaks down. Whatever it is. Like, you're not the best version of yourself.
Right. And is arguing necessary, would you say, in a marriage or relationship?
Shit, we still argue now. I think there was something, even this weekend, we were talking about something, and she said something, and she was, like, raising her voice at me. But then when I raised my voice at her, I was like, and then she yells at me, I'm like, you're the one that raised your voice first that started all this. And
right.
And then it took like 10 minutes, and I'm like, do you know what we're arguing about?
Right.
It was like something stupid. We were both like stressed on something stupid.
Are you guys like very good at like once the argument happens?
Yeah.
The emotions are high. I feel like a lot of successful relationships learn how to take that resolved conflict and say, listen, like, what's the big picture here?
Yeah.
But I think that goes back to what we were talking about earlier about the finances, because you have the bigger vision. She sees it, she knows it, and she's going to be with you along that ride.
Right.
And that's what that allows it to be that way.
She knows I'm always trying to guide to a better path. She knows I'm always working on myself,
yeah.
Meaning I'm listening to things of how do we get better, where are we going, what do we want to do, and I'm always prodding at her for those things.
Yep.
But she was the saver over the years, which kind of helped too, which translated into me being a better saver. But she's just like a good family-oriented person. Mm-hmm. And, people think of being rich by money, but you really need to be rich by friends and family. Like, you can't pick your family, right? But you can pick your friends. And I'll never forget my dad saying, if you got this many people in your hand that you could call and say, I got locked up today, can you get me out of jail? Like, think of the worst case scenario, right? Like, how many do you have that you could call? And I was like, I remember, through my 20s, I'd be like, man, I probably got, I don't know, maybe 3 hands full. Now I'm probably down to 1 handful that I would call and say, and maybe a little bit more, but I think of ones that I'll be like, man, I need,
they're going to be,
and they're here. They're not 5 states away or something.
Right.
I have different friends across the country, and I'm like, I know I could call them and like, I need your help.
Right.
And they'll be here, but they're going to have to take a plane or whatever, plane, trains, and automobiles. But I think of that's rich. But being rich is affecting other people in such a positive way of like, how are you getting more out of life and enjoying life? Mm-hmm. And it's always the journey. It's never a destination. Yeah. And I can't reinforce that enough. So many people like, I'm going to start this new business. This is what I'm going to do. And blah, 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 I'm going to buy these things. I'm like, all right.
Right. But you mentioned this, like you're going after something, and I think a husband or wife, if you're someone who is after something, the secret from what I'm hearing from you is that you just need someone who's going to be by your side, go through the ups and downs, and not only go through ups and downs, but have the same vision that you painted. Yeah. She's got to have
and be
that
supportive
and support through not only when things are going good. The relationship is built on when it's at its worst.
Yeah, well, you're telling yourself you're a piece of shit and like you're like losing money and all this stuff and like nothing's going right, and she's the one going, it'll be okay. Yeah, it'll be okay. You need that.
That's so important. That's something that I've learned. Like I really like. At the end of the day, if I, look, at the end of my life, I want to be with someone that has that like foundation aspect. That's gonna be, because before, like, all the relationships that I've had, they've never understood it. Like, it's super hard for them to, like, all the girls that I dated to understand, like, this is my life, I'm going after it. Unfortunately, I'm making a lot of sacrifices in X, Y, and Z to get there. I can't just stop it just for you. And it's not an insult. It's, I'm after something so much greater than where I'm currently at, and I just need someone to join it, because you're going to have what you want in this life in return if you just trust it and be loyal to this person. So,
well, I think I was listening with Alex Harmozy when he was talking about it. That's who it was, Alex Harmozy.
He's a great example of this, by the way.
And he was talking about, because him and his wife only been together 7 years. They were together a year, and then they got married. But he was like, at his first date, they met online, and he's trying to hire her for his company. He's like, and she's like, I don't even know you yet. But he said within 3 weeks she was coming to work for him. But it was like they were making each other better.
Yeah.
And he's like, she's way better than I am. She's like has her such great strengths, and then he's figured out what he's good at and where do they balance their time and efforts. And now they've built amazing companies in the process.
He's such a great example, and for those of you that don't, Alex Murs, he has a YouTube channel. He's the head of acquisition.com. He from where he started, and a lot of people, even a ton of people, big gurus, Ed Milet will say this, that he wouldn't be where he is without her, because she really elevated him. Right. And I think a great partner does that for you. They'll elevate you. So yeah, I mean, I know we're about 40 minutes in, so we're a little past time, but I think there's even more that we can get into, and I'm sure we'll have a part 2 at some point, because there's just so much more behind the scenes here. But yeah, we focused on a lot of aspects that tackle both finances, the personal life, and your love life. And you're a great example of this, and you've done a great job with it, even though it's not. Now. It's not perfect.
All the gray hairs.
It's not perfect, but you've gone through it, and you're a great example of someone who's pushing through and going through the everyday life like that. So I appreciate you for being a great example for me.
Thanks. And then our next one, we're going to talk about the body. So Near Perfect Body, we're going to have Roger Shores just wrote a book on that, just talking about discussing, hey, how does that shape? Because I kind of fed into like the challenge I did for F45 and so forth. But I was like, we'll get into that next week. Yeah. So we'll talk about the human body, everybody. So we got some exciting stuff coming up, and we look forward to having everybody tune in. So don't forget to subscribe below.
There you go.